The barn was silent, the faint scent of hay and earth surrounding me as I stood frozen in place. Emily's green eyes glimmered with a mix of mischief and intent as she stepped closer, her presence impossible to ignore. My heart raced as she reached out, her fingers brushing my shirt, igniting a storm of emotions I wasn't prepared for. In that moment, everything I thought I knew began to unravel. Clara and I had been married for 5 years, a comfortable, steady relationship that had weathered the usual ups and downs of life. She was kind, dependable, and fiercely loyal, qualities that had drawn me to her in the first place. We shared a quiet life in the suburbs, surrounded by the routines that come with building a life together. From grocery shopping on Sundays to late-night talks about our dreams, it all felt predictable but safe. Every summer, we visited Clara's parents on their farm. It was a tradition we both enjoyed, long drives through rolling green fields, the scent of fresh air, and the warmth of family. Her parents, now in their 70s, always welcomed us with open arms. They were the kind of people who found joy in simple things, a well-tended garden, a hearty meal, and the laughter of loved ones. I had always felt at ease in their home, a rustic farmhouse that seemed to exist in its own little bubble, untouched by the chaos of the world. Clara's father, a retired school teacher, had a knack for storytelling, while her mother kept the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread and coffee. It was a place that reminded me of everything good in life, stability, love, and tradition. But this summer, something was different. When we arrived, I noticed her younger sister, Emily, or Dem as the family affectionately called her. Though I had met her before, it had been years, and she had changed. Gone was the shy teenager I remembered. In her place was a strikingly confident young woman with an air of mystery that I couldn't quite place. Her green eyes, vibrant and piercing, seemed to hold secrets she wasn't willing to share. As the day unfolded, I found myself drawn to her in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't intentional, just fleeting glances and the occasional shared laugh over something trivial. But each moment lingered, her presence pulling at the edges of my mind. I told myself it was harmless, just a passing thought. After all, I loved my wife, and nothing could change that. The day passed in a blur of family chatter, laughter, and the delicious aroma of grilled meat wafting from the barbecue. I busied myself helping Clara's father in the garden, pulling weeds and tidying the vegetable beds. Emily flitted in and out of the house, her laughter ringing out as she teased her parents or offered to carry drinks outside. Her presence was magnetic, but I tried to focus on my tasks, reminding myself of the boundaries that defined my place here. It was during dinner that I began to notice the cracks in my resolve. Seated across from Emily, I couldn't help but catch her gaze more often than I intended. She held my eyes longer than she should have, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. Clara sat beside me, completely unaware, her attention focused on her mother's story about a new neighbor who had recently moved into town. I laughed at all the right moments, nodding along to the conversation, but my mind was elsewhere. Emily's presence was inescapable, the tension between us subtle but undeniable. When the meal ended, Clara's father suggested we move inside for dessert, but Emily stopped me as I rose from my chair. "Could you help me with something in the barn?" she asked, her voice casual but her eyes glinting with something unspoken. "Sure," I replied before I could think it through. Clara shot me a curious look but said nothing as I followed Emily outside. The evening air was crisp, the sounds of crickets and distant rustling filling the silence as we made our way to the barn. When we stepped inside, Emily walked ahead, her hand trailing along the wooden beams. "I just need to grab something from the top shelf," she said, stretching her arms toward the loft. I stood awkwardly by the door, my pulse quickening as the hem of her dress lifted slightly with her movements. "Do you need a hand?" I asked, my voice betraying my unease. She turned, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. "Actually, yes." Her words hung in the air, thick with implication. I hesitated, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. Before I could process what was happening, she stepped closer, her fingers brushing my shirt. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the earthy smell of the barn, and I felt an inexplicable pull that I couldn't fight. "Emily," I started, my voice strained, but she silenced me with a look. "It's just us," she said softly, her tone steady but her eyes searching mine. I wanted to step back, to put distance between us, but my body betrayed me. The air between us felt charged, every nerve in my body screaming at me to make a choice. When she leaned in, her breath warm against my skin, I froze. In that moment, everything else faded, the love I had for Clara, the vows I had made, the life we had built. All that remained was the undeniable pull of the moment. As quickly as it started, it was over. She stepped back, her expression unreadable, and walked past me to the door. "Thanks for helping," she said casually, as though nothing had happened. I stood there for a long moment, my thoughts racing. When I returned to the house, Clara greeted me with a warm smile, asking if I had enjoyed helping in the barn. I forced a laugh, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. "Just clearing some things out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That night, as I lay beside Clara in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the scene in the barn, the look in Emily's eyes, the brush of her hand against mine. Guilt churned in my stomach, but so did something else, something I couldn't admit to myself, let alone anyone else. The barn incident lingered in my mind, an unshakable memory that colored every interaction with Emily in the days that followed. She carried on as though nothing had happened, her laughter bright, her demeanor as carefree as ever, but every glance she threw my way felt loaded, every accidental touch deliberate. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew better. The next evening, Clara suggested we take a walk through the fields after dinner. Her parents declined, preferring the comfort of the porch, but Emily eagerly agreed. The three of us set out together, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Clara walked ahead, pointing out the old oak tree where she and Emily used to play as children. Emily stayed close to me, her hand brushing mine briefly as we navigated the uneven path. Each touch sent a jolt through me, my senses heightened in her presence. I forced myself to focus on Clara's stories, nodding and laughing at the right moments, but my attention was divided. When we reached the tree, Clara wandered off to examine a patch of wildflowers she remembered planting years ago. Emily stayed behind, leaning against the weathered trunk, her green eyes fixed on me. "You've been quiet," she said, her voice low but steady. "Just tired," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "Is that all it is?" she asked, her tone soft but insistent. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. "What else would it be?" She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "You tell me," she said, her lips curving into a faint smile. Her hand brushed mine again, this time lingering, her fingers curling slightly around mine. I should have pulled away, should have said something to break the moment, but I couldn't. I was rooted in place, caught between guilt and a magnetic pull I couldn't explain. Before I could respond, Clara called out, waving us over to admire the flowers she had found. The spell was broken, and Emily withdrew her hand, her expression unreadable as she turned to follow her sister. I exhaled shakily, the tension in my chest refusing to ease. That night, as I sat alone on the porch while Clara talked with her parents inside, Emily joined me. She didn't say anything at first, simply sitting beside me and gazing out at the fields illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. The silence stretched between us, heavy but unspoken. "I've always admired you," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the stillness. "The way you care for Clara, the way you make everyone feel at ease." Her words caught me off guard, and I turned to look at her. "That's kind of you to say," I replied cautiously. She smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's more than kindness," she said. "You're different. Special. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you." I didn't know how to respond, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't untangle. "Emily," I began, my voice faltering. "You shouldn't." "I know," she interrupted, her eyes meeting mine, filled with a vulnerability I hadn't expected. "But I can't help how I feel." Her confession hung in the air, and I felt my resolve wavering. The lines between us had already begun to blur, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to redraw them. Before I could say anything, she reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. Her touch was soft, hesitant, but it sent a shiver through me all the same. "I don't want to make things harder for you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I needed you to know." I pulled my hand away, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "This isn't right, Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know that." She nodded, her expression filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. "I know," she said. "But that doesn't make it any less real." We sat in silence after that, the tension between us thicker than ever. When I finally stood to go back inside, she remained on the porch, her gaze fixed on the fields. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the memory of her touch, her words, her unwavering gaze. Something had changed between us, and no matter how much I wanted to deny it, I knew there was no going back. The following morning was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The house, usually filled with the sound of Clara's parents bustling around or Clara herself humming as she cooked breakfast, seemed subdued. Emily was nowhere to be seen, and I felt a strange mix of relief and unease at her absence. Clara's mother mentioned that Emily had gone for a walk, but her knowing glance left me questioning how much she had noticed. As the day wore on, the tension in my chest only grew. I busied myself with chores around the farm, helping Clara's father repair a section of fencing near the barn. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus. The memory of Emily's words from the night before lingered in my mind, her touch still a phantom sensation against my skin. It wasn't until the late afternoon that I saw her again. I was in the barn, organizing tools, when she walked in. Her footsteps were soft, but I felt her presence before I even turned to look. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable, her green eyes piercing. "I didn't mean to upset you last night," she said softly, stepping inside. I straightened, my heart pounding in my chest. "You didn't upset me," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. She tilted her head, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "You're lying," she said simply. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I didn't fully understand what I was feeling: guilt, confusion, and something deeper that I couldn't bring myself to name. "Emily," I began, turning to face her. "This, whatever this is, it has to stop." She took another step closer, her gaze unwavering. "Why? Because it's wrong? Or because you're afraid of what it means?" "Both," I admitted, my voice trembling. Her expression softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing my arm. "You don't have to be afraid," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything. I need you to know how I feel. That's all." Her honesty was disarming, and I found myself unable to look away. "This can't go anywhere, Emily," I said, though the words felt hollow. "I love Clara. She's my wife." "I know," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "And I love her too. But that doesn't change how I feel." The silence that followed was suffocating, the air between us heavy with unspoken truths. I wanted to say something, anything, that would break the moment, but no words came. Instead, I turned away, focusing on the tools in front of me as though they held the answers I was searching for. Emily didn't leave. She stayed there, her presence a constant reminder of the line we had already blurred. "You don't have to say anything," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I leaned against the workbench, my hands trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. The emotions swirling inside me were overwhelming, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of guilt and desire. That evening, as we all sat down for dinner, the tension was palpable. Emily was quieter than usual, her gaze focused on her plate. Clara, oblivious to the undercurrent between us, chatted cheerfully about plans for the next day. Her laughter, usually a source of comfort, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. After dinner, as Clara and her parents cleaned up, I stepped outside to get some air. The cool breeze was a welcome relief, but it did little to calm my racing mind. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Emily standing there, her expression hesitant. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking the stillness. I didn't mean to make things harder for you. It's not your fault, I replied, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. This whole situation is complicated. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as though to shield against the chill. I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I won't say anything. This is between us. Her words were a small comfort, but they did little to ease the turmoil inside me. Thank you, I said quietly. But we can't keep doing this, Emily. It's not fair to anyone, especially Clara. I know, she said, her voice filled with sadness. But it doesn't make it any easier. The days that followed were a blur. Emily kept her distance, and I did my best to focus on Clara and her family, trying to rebuild the sense of normalcy that had been shattered. But the memory of those moments in the barn, the porch, and the field stayed with me, haunting me in ways I couldn't escape. When the time came to leave, Emily avoided saying goodbye. Clara's parents hugged us warmly, thanking us for the visit, but Emily remained inside, her absence a stark contrast to the warmth of the farewell. As we drove away, Clara noticed my quiet demeanor but didn't press, chalking it up to fatigue from the weekend. Back home, the weight of what had happened continued to bear down on me. I wanted to move past it, to forget the feelings that had surfaced, but they lingered, an unspoken truth that refused to be ignored. The guilt of my actions and inactions was a constant reminder of the boundaries I had crossed and the lives I had risked affecting. Emily's confession had changed everything, leaving me questioning not only my own feelings but the stability of the life I had built. And though I loved Clara deeply, I couldn't deny the part of me that still thought of Emily, the part of me that wondered what might have been if things were different. Returning home from Clara's family farm didn't bring the relief I had hoped for. Instead, the memories of the weekend lingered, weighing heavily on me. I tried to focus on the familiar routines, work, errands, and quiet evenings with Clara, but nothing felt the same. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily, the way her gaze lingered, the softness of her voice, and the unspoken tension that had passed between us. Clara noticed my distance. "You've been quiet since we got back," she said one evening as we sat on the couch. Her tone was casual, but her eye searched mine for an answer I wasn't ready to give. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "It was a busy weekend." She nodded, accepting my excuse, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. The guilt gnawed at me, not just for what had happened with Emily, but for the way I was now failing Clara, the woman I had promised to love and protect above all else. Days turned into weeks, and while life moved on, the internal turmoil didn't ease. I caught myself checking my phone, half hoping for a message from Emily that never came. Part of me longed for closure, for a chance to address the unresolved emotions that had been left behind. But another part of me feared any contact would only deepen the wound. Then, one evening, Clara received a call from her mother. They chatted for a while, Clara's voice light and cheerful as she recounted our visit. But something shifted when she asked about Emily. "She's been keeping to herself lately," Clara's mother said, her voice muffled through the phone. "I think she's been feeling a bit down since you left." Clara frowned, concern etched across her face. "Maybe I should call her," she said after hanging up. "She seemed fine while we were there, but you know how Emily can be." I nodded non-committally, my stomach twisting into knots. The thought of Clara reaching out to Emily only heightened my anxiety. What if Emily said something? What if Clara sensed there was more to the story than either of us had let on? The call never happened. Clara got busy with work and other commitments, but the fear of discovery lingered. It became a constant presence, a shadow following me wherever I went. Meanwhile, the distance between Clara and me grew. She tried to reconnect, suggesting date nights and weekend getaways, but I found myself making excuses, too consumed by my guilt and confusion to fully engage. "Are we okay?" she asked one evening, her voice soft and hesitant. "Of course," I said, but the words felt hollow. Deep down, I knew that until I confronted what had happened with Emily, I couldn't truly move forward, not with Clara, not with myself. One sleepless night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Among the snapshots of vacations and family gatherings, I stumbled upon a picture from the weekend at the farm. It was of Clara and Emily, their arms around each other, both of them laughing. The sight of it sent a pang through my chest, a painful reminder of what I stood to lose. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The weight of my guilt and the unresolved feelings for Emily were pulling me further away from Clara, threatening to destroy the life we had built together. But I didn't know how to fix it. The idea of confessing the truth terrified me, but so did the thought of continuing to live with this secret. In the end, I chose to protect Clara. I buried the memories of that weekend as best as I could, focusing instead on repairing our relationship. I made a conscious effort to be more present, to show her the love and attention she deserved. It wasn't easy, there were still moments when the memories crept in, unbidden and unwelcome, but I refused to let them define me. As for Emily, I avoided any contact. Clara spoke to her occasionally, relaying updates about her life, but I kept my distance. It was better this way, cleaner, safer. Whatever had passed between us was in the past, and that's where it needed to stay. Over time, the wounds began to heal. Clara and I found our rhythm again, rediscovering the closeness that had once defined our relationship. But the experience had changed me, leaving a scar that I carried quietly, a reminder of how easily the lines of loyalty and love can blur. Looking back, I realized there was no simple way to make sense of what had happened. It was a moment of weakness, a collision of circumstances and emotions that I hadn't been prepared to face. And while I couldn't undo it, I could choose to learn from it, to hold tighter to the things that mattered, to never again let myself be so easily led astray. In the end, life is messy, filled with mistakes and regrets. But it's also about choices, the choice to own your actions, to repair what's broken, and to fight for the people who matter most. And that's what I chose to do. Months passed, and the intensity of what happened at the farm began to fade, though the memory never fully disappeared. I poured myself into rebuilding my relationship with Clara, determined to rekindle the bond that had once been effortless between us. Slowly, we found our way back to each other, but I couldn't deny that I was changed. The experience with Emily had left a scar, not visible, but deep and personal, a reminder of how fragile trust and loyalty can be. Clara never suspected a thing. She continued to speak fondly of Emily, often suggesting we plan another trip to visit her parents. Each time, I found an excuse to delay, terrified of what another encounter with Emily might bring. My silence was self-preservation, though it came at a cost. I felt distant from the woman who had given me her unconditional love, knowing I carried a secret that would break her if she ever learned the truth. Emily and I never spoke again. Clara's occasional updates about her life felt surreal, as though Emily had become a character in a story I wasn't part of anymore. "She's been seeing someone," Clara mentioned once, her tone light. "I think it's serious." The news brought a strange mix of relief and sadness. I wanted her to find happiness, to move on, but it was a stark reminder of the emotions that had passed between us and the unresolved feelings I had buried deep within myself. One evening, Clara and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. She leaned against my shoulder, her warmth a quiet comfort. "I'm glad we're doing okay," she said softly, her words carrying an undertone of vulnerability. "Me too," I replied, wrapping my arm around her. And I meant it. Despite everything, I knew I loved her. The experience at the farm had shaken me to my core, but it also served as a wake-up call, a reminder of what truly mattered. Looking back, I realized the greatest lesson was the importance of boundaries and self-awareness. Life is filled with temptations and moments of weakness, but it's how we respond to those moments that define who we are. I had faltered, but I had also chosen to fight for the life and the love I had built with Clara. The path forward wasn't perfect, it rarely is. There were moments of doubt, flashes of memory that crept in unbidden, but I made a conscious choice every day to be better, to prioritize the trust and love Clara had given me so freely. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning from it. As for Emily, she remained a part of Clara's family, someone I couldn't completely avoid but could choose to keep at a distance. Each family gathering, each polite exchange, was a test of my resolve, a reminder of the line I had crossed and the commitment I had made to never cross it again. Life isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about how we recover from them. It's about choosing love, loyalty, and honesty, even when it's hard. And though the road was rocky, I found my way back to those values, one step at a time. Sitting on the porch that night with Clara, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to define me. What mattered was the choice I made to move forward, to rebuild, to love, and to never take for granted the life we had created together. Life is complicated, and sometimes the choices we make define us more than the mistakes we've made. What would you do in a situation like this? Could you find a way to move forward, or would the weight of it hold you back? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories of love, temptation, and redemption. Stay tuned for the next chapter.